There is a quiet moment where the body makes a request and nothing follows. You feel the dryness in your throat, the dull ache behind the eyes that signals dehydration. You notice it clearly, almost clinically. Yet the glass of water on the table might as well be sealed behind thick glass. The distance between knowing and doing feels infinite, not because the action is difficult, but because it feels inaccessible. This isn't confusion. You understand perfectly well what the body needs. You can list the steps: stand up, walk, drink. The logic is intact. What's missing is the internal permission to move. This gap is often mistaken for indifference, but it is something else entirely. You are not unaware of your own decline. You are hyper-aware of it. You feel the stiffness, the mess accumulating, the slow erosion of your baseline. You watch yourself stall, as if from a distance, while the controls remain locked. The question isn't why you don't care. It's why caring no longer translates into action. Why this is misread as laziness. From the outside, this state looks simple. A messy room, skipped meals, missed messages. The conclusion feels obvious to anyone watching. You must not care enough. The world is trained to read visible disorder as a failure of character. If something mattered, you would act. If you wanted it badly enough, you would try harder. This interpretation is so culturally ingrained that it rarely gets questioned. Advice follows quickly, offered with confidence. Just start small. Set a timer. Make a list. These suggestions assume the problem lives in planning or motivation. They solve a logistical issue that does not exist. When the advice doesn't work, the judgment sharpens. Now it's not just disorganization. It's resistance, stubbornness, a refusal to help yourself. Over time, explaining becomes pointless. You stop correcting the misunderstanding because naming an invisible paralysis takes more energy than accepting the label. And slowly, that label begins to feel true, not because it is accurate, but because it is repeated often enough to settle in. The nervous system break. What looks like passivity is actually restraint. Beneath the stillness, the body is doing something very specific. It is applying the brakes. The nervous system has decided that movement itself carries risk, so it limits output, not by removing desire, but by blocking follow-through. You still generate intent. You still think about what should be done, but the signal is intercepted before it reaches the muscles. This isn't the surge of panic people associate with stress. It's the opposite. Instead of mobilizing energy to fight or flee, the system shifts into inhibition. Heart rate slows. The body feels heavy. Time flattens. This response exists for a reason. When escape is impossible, stillness can preserve life. But that mechanism was never meant to become a default setting. In a modern context, there is no predator to pass. The threat is diffuse, constant, and unresolved, so the brake stays engaged. What began as protection slowly turns into a cage, one that feels safer than movement, even as it quietly drains what little energy remains. Exhausted while doing nothing. One of the strangest parts of this state is the fatigue. You appear inactive. You may be sitting still for hours, barely moving, and yet you feel completely depleted, as if you've run a marathon without leaving the room. This exhaustion doesn't come from effort. It comes from suppression. Every unmet need sends a signal upward: thirst, hunger, discomfort. And every time that signal is ignored, the brain has to actively override it. That override is not passive. It requires continuous energy. You are not resting. You are maintaining a block. The body is producing activation while simultaneously shutting it down. This is why distraction doesn't restore you. Scrolling, zoning out, or lying still doesn't replenish anything. The system never powers down. It idles at high cost. Over time, this creates a paradox where doing nothing becomes the most expensive thing you can do. You aren't tired because you failed to act. You're tired because your nervous system has been working nonstop to make sure you don't. Numbness and the loss of interoception. To keep this state intact, the body has to make another adjustment. It turns the volume down on sensation. Interoception is the brain's ability to feel what's happening inside the body. Hunger, thirst, tension, temperature, the subtle signals that normally guide care. In a prolonged freeze, those signals become a liability. If you fully felt the discomfort, you would be forced to move, and movement has already been labeled as unsafe. So the system dulls perception. The thirst becomes vague. The hunger loses urgency. The mess fades into the background. This numbness doesn't arrive all at once. It develops gradually, through repetition. Each ignored signal teaches the brain that feeling is unnecessary. This is why self-care starts to feel strangely threatening. Taking care of the body requires re-entering it. It requires turning the volume back up. But if the body has become associated with overwhelm, stress, or shame, then inhabiting it feels like walking into a room you've been avoiding for years. Neglect as protection, not self-sabotage. It's easy to frame this pattern as self-sabotage, as if some part of you is intentionally working against your own interests. But biologically, that explanation doesn't hold. Systems don't sabotage themselves. They adapt. What looks like neglect is often a form of protection that has outlived its usefulness. By lowering the level of care, you lower the level of demand. A body that is unkempt, a space that is chaotic, a life that appears stalled, these things quietly communicate that you are not available for more. Expectations soften. Pressure recedes. In the short term, this works. The nervous system experiences relief, not because things are better, but because less is being asked. The problem is that the strategy doesn't know when to stop. What began as a way to survive a period of overwhelm becomes a permanent stance. The neglect turns into a bunker. It keeps stress out, but it also seals you inside with the decay. You are not refusing to care. You're trying to stay safe in the only way your body currently understands. How the freeze spreads across life. Once the nervous system learns that avoidance reduces pressure, it begins to apply that logic everywhere. The messy room is just the most visible symptom. The same mechanism shows up in unopened mail, ignored bank statements, and appointments that never get scheduled. These aren't paper or tasks. They are signals of consequence. Each one represents a future that demands engagement, and engagement still feels dangerous. Health is handled the same way. Minor symptoms are filed away for later because addressing them requires inhabiting the body again. Work follows suit. You may stay in roles beneath your capacity, not from lack of ability, but because ambition increases visibility and visibility increases risk. Even relationships begin to erode. Messages go unanswered because they open loops you don't have the energy to close. Life slowly shrinks to what is absolutely necessary. Maintenance disappears. Everything waits until it becomes an emergency, because emergencies override freeze. What remains is a narrow, fragile existence built entirely around minimizing input, even as it quietly dismantles the future. The erosion of agency and the future self. Every time you notice a need and don't respond, something subtle shifts. The issue isn't the task left undone. It's the lesson your nervous system absorbs. Over time, it learns that intention has no effect. Wanting doesn't lead anywhere. Trying changes nothing. This isn't a belief you choose. It's a pattern that gets trained through repetition. As this link weakens, your sense of agency erodes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who can influence outcomes. The future becomes abstract, almost fictional. Planning feels pointless because the version of you who would benefit from it doesn't feel real. All that exists is the present moment and the effort required to endure it. A regulated nervous system can think in weeks and years. A system stuck in freeze cannot. Its entire focus is on maintaining equilibrium right now. You aren't failing to invest in your future self because you don't care. You're failing because the system responsible for caring no longer has access to the future at all. The long-term cost of being safe. The freeze response feels protective because it reduces exposure. Less movement, less visibility, less demand. In the short term, that reduction can feel like relief. But over time, the cost becomes unavoidable. A nervous system that never discharges stress doesn't stay neutral. It accumulates wear. The body may look still, but internally it is working overtime, constantly suppressing activation that never gets resolved. Psychologically, the world begins to flatten. When all energy is spent on staying contained, there is nothing left for curiosity, pleasure, or risk. Joy becomes muted, not because it's gone, but because it requires the same openness that once felt dangerous. Life becomes quieter, smaller, and more predictable. This is the trade being made. You gain safety from failure, judgment, and overwhelm, but you also lose access to momentum, pride, and change. The strategy succeeds at preserving you, but it does so by stripping life of its texture. You survive, but you no longer participate. And survival alone was never meant to be the endpoint. There is no external permission slip. At some point, the realization settles in that understanding the pattern hasn't changed it. Insight doesn't loosen the body. Knowing why you're frozen doesn't automatically restore movement. There is no moment where fear fully subsides and action suddenly feels safe again. The nervous system doesn't work that way. It doesn't release control because it has been convinced. It releases control because it has been shown. Many people wait for a signal that it's finally okay to re-enter their lives. More energy, less anxiety, a clearer mind. That signal rarely arrives on its own. Safety isn't something the world hands back to you. It has to be generated from inside the very discomfort you've been avoiding. This doesn't happen through dramatic overhauls. It happens through small, embodied acts that rebuild trust between intention and movement. Not fixing everything, not catching up, just proving, quietly and repeatedly, that a single step doesn't equal danger. There is no rescuer coming to unlock the door. The only way out is the way through, and it begins the moment you decide to feel something again, even briefly, on purpose.